This video is a parable, so the story I'm about to tell didn't happen in history. I'm using this parable to teach you about the necessity of anticipating and outsmarting envious people who carry envious spirits. Okay? So, in this story we're going to France, the Kingdom of France, around the 1700s. France had the most inhabitants of Europe back then. For this story's sake, we are going to say that they had 20 million people of the 60 million that lived in Europe. So 20 million French folks. So they had a lot of folks, but the country was locked off. In the sense, the French didn't bother much with other countries. They're so focused on themselves. One day, an ambassador of Spain gives a hint to his French colleague who was ambassador of France, and he told him, "Francois, I have heard rumors that Russia will come after France." And Francois asked him, "Pedro, what are you talking about, man?" And Pedro tells him, "Francois, the French are dominant in diplomacy in the world. The Russians feel left out. So they want to ruin the influence of France. So watch out with the Russians." So Francois returns home and he tells the French nobles about this. And the French nobles, they laugh at him. They roll on the floor and they say, "Francois, come on. You listen to what that Spanish ambassador was saying. Just look at the map. You see the map here? You see where France is? Where we are? You see where Russia is? You see that big pink country in between? Well, actually it's a union of two countries, Poland and Lithuania. You seen it?" Francois said yes. "Oh, okay. Did you see the Holy Roman Empire, which is a collection of German states? It's a very chaotic mess, but you've seen it? Between Poland and France?" Francois said, "Yes, I've seen it." "Oh, let's go to the north. You see that sea called the North Sea?" "Yes, I've seen it." "You see that country called Denmark that also rules Norway?" "Yes, I've seen it," Francois said. "Oh, did you see the Swedish Empire that controls the Baltic Sea at the moment?" "Yes, I've seen it." Then he tell them, "Francois, there is no way Russia would succeed in coming after us." So Francois didn't bother with the case anymore. So in May that same year, the Polish ambassador in Paris reported that Poland, who also ruled Lithuania, got into a treaty with Russia, a military treaty. And this treaty enabled the Russians to establish a marine base in Gdansk at the Baltic Sea. That happened in May. When the nobles heard it, they think, "Oh well, Russia just wants to show his muscles." So they didn't bother with it. In December, news came in from Dutch traders who just came from the Baltic Sea, stating that the Russians had 32 marine vessels in Gdansk. Those were not big war vessels. They weren't really war vessels, but they had a fleet in Gdansk, in the Baltic Sea. And the Dutch traders were talking to one another. They knew what Russia was up to. Then in February of the next year, you hear that the Russians formed a deal with the Republic of Venice. And now Russians were allowed to have a small fleet in the Adriatic Sea also. Not a huge one, you only had like 15 ships. And then that Francois, who was in Madrid at the time, still being the French ambassador, asked himself, hold on a minute. Past year, a Spanish diplomat told me that he heard that Russia was coming after France. Since then, the Russians established a small fleet at the Baltic Sea and one at Adriatic Sea. This is a bit suspicious, so he reported this to the people at home by letter this time. He didn't went back to France this time, by letter, and they even responded to his letter. He got the message, he didn't want to hear about it. But then, Francois returned back home to Toulon, where he came from, and he noticed there that there were Russian migrants that came in Toulon for trade. But he didn't trust it. They came with 5 ships at the same time. And he was thinking, how can the Russians come here through the Mediterranean Sea? They have no access, no shore to the Mediterranean Sea. If they would come, they should come from the North Sea. So then Francois realized, hold on a minute, this is getting out of hand. So Francois told the nobles in Paris, let's get into a maritime treaty with Sweden and with Denmark, so that we can station some marine vessels over there. The nobles told them, Francois, please, we know that you're fanatic about France, but you're going way too far. We got this under control. Oh, there are Russian migrants who want to trade to France. Don't you see it? They see that we are superior. What's wrong with you thinking they want to attack us? They were very foolish to attack the great kingdom of France. So, another year passed by. Now we are in March. Now, there are reports throughout France, especially in the northern cities at the English Channel, of French citizens being kidnapped. And the French Marine arrests several of those kidnappers, and they were Russian. Now, Francois didn't heard about it because Francois was working in a library now. He had another function. He was tired of politics. So the nobles, at least some of them, thought, you know what? Maybe this Francois was telling the truth. Maybe this Francois wasn't just overly fanatic. I mean, within 2 years, the Russians placed 2 fleets, one in the Baltic Sea, one in the Adriatic Sea. Then you had Russian migrants through the Mediterranean come to Toulon for trade, and now you have Russians active in the English Channel kidnapping French citizens. What's going on here? So they agreed, together with the French king, to send an envoy to Sweden to find out more. But the envoy was only near Amsterdam when the envoy noticed that it was way too late. Because when they passed The Hague, because they stopped near the Hague for a while just to purchase some food to continue, they heard that there were 1,200 Russian troops in France, hidden and ready to cause riots. So they returned and reported this to the nobles. And now the nobles were terrified because they didn't know where those 1,200 Russian troops were. They didn't know what they were up to exactly, nor where the riots would emerge. So now they were in panic. But here's the thing. If they would have listened to Francois, when Francois told them, we need to pay attention to the Russians because I've heard they have bad blood towards us, they thought, look at the distance. What could Russia do to us? well, Russia couldn't come directly towards them because there's indeed a big difference and many countries in between, but they worked through alliances with, in this case, Venice, Poland, and through alliances they managed to come close to France, and they knew they would not be able to send an army directly, so they sent soldiers that functioned as spies. And those spies, they learned French, they spoke French well, and they reported everything they saw in France to their agents in Amsterdam. From Amsterdam, the reports were sent further to Russia. So within a few months, they had a good oversight of what was going on in France, what France's vulnerabilities were, and they placed the troops on key locations to cause riots, and the riots would collapse the whole kingdom. Now, the French nobles would not have been in that situation if they would have anticipated Russia's aggression. When Francois told them, get into alliance with Denmark and Sweden so that we can have a maritime base in the Baltic Sea, if they would have done that and sent several ships over there, then the Russians would have gotten the message that, oh there, the French are close. And they are in alliance with Denmark and with Sweden. And we border Sweden. We need Sweden for trade. So if we attack the French vessels in the Baltic Sea, Sweden will turn on us. Denmark will turn on us. And when Denmark turns on us, some of those German states will turn on us also. Oh, hold on a minute. The French also have an alliance with this country called Crimea. A country we need for trade on the Black Sea with the Ottoman Empire. Oh, you're telling me that there are already 600 French troops over there? What? If the French would have strategically anticipated aggression from Russia, Russia could have never infiltrated France and hold its hostage. Now, this is just a parable, okay? I said it before. This didn't happen. But in this parable, France didn't look at the bigger picture. France only looked at the small picture. France didn't look at the map carefully. Because if France would have checked the map carefully, they would have realized, you know what? Russia is far removed from us, but through alliances, they would be able to outsmart us and trap us. You know what? We are going to form alliances in advance, just in case Russia decides to form alliances against us. Because Russia would not, the Russian diplomats would not tell the Polish nor the Venetians, you know what, we want alliance with you so that we can get France. Because if they would say that directly, the Polish and the Venetians would say to them, get out of here, we don't take that. So they came with a friendship treaty with both countries, but it was really they weren't really interested in friendship with those two countries. They just wanted the alliance with those countries to assault France. The enemy, when the enemy comes after you, the enemy will get into alliance with certain people, not because he cares about those people, but because he wants to use those people to get to you. Let's say, I'll forget about the paranormal for a moment. Let's say you live in a house and you have some housemates that can't stand you. Let's say those housemates leave because they need to leave the complex. They still can't stand your guts and they're upset that you remain behind and that they have to leave. So if there's a new guy that comes to live there, they may reveal all kinds of, not really reveal things, but they would reveal the tension that there were in the house against you, but they will portray you as a perpetrator. And the new guy would also know anything, heard negative information about you. So everything else he will receive from you, he will filter through the negative information. Until he realized that the negative information wasn't true, but a lot of folks, they hold on to the first information they hear. So if the first information you hear of you is bad, they tend to hold on to it. Why? Because to examine what they received from you would imply they need to examine all their other expectations, and they don't want that. So to prevent themselves from having to check themselves, they would play the victim if they have a negative view of you based on negative information they've heard about you. They've heard negative information about you. It was their responsibility to check it, to examine it. They didn't want to do it. So if now they need to face that they don't want to take responsibility, they don't want to do that. So they will play the victim as if they couldn't know any better. They could have done better, but now they've become an enemy of you also, just for the sake of them not having to check themselves. Now, in this case, if you know that a new guy is coming, you can decide to converse with them first, or you can decide, you know what, if that new guy comes and he has a negative view of me, I already know that I'm going to treat him in a decent way, and sooner or later I'm out of this house complex. You anticipate the enemy's aggression. You can't prevent it, but you'll anticipate so that when it happens, you're far ahead. That's how believers ought to be in this world. Don't be like that proud kingdom of France. Be alert, look at the bigger picture, and act in advance. Be at peace.